Her neighbor, Camilla, knocked on the door at 11 p.m. "Your billionaire husband, Ethan, is at my house." I don't know how to say this. The wife, Ariana, ran over there expecting a mistress. But when she walked into the neighbor's guest room, both of them were caught not by a jealous spouse, but by the cold, hard evidence of massive financial fraud. Her husband, Ethan, slumped down not from shame of infidelity, but from sheer terror of the flash drive his analytical wife now held. The neighbor's confession was a lie, and the real betrayal was far colder than a fleeting affair. The 11 p.m. rebirth. This will be the most emotional audit of your life. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Billionaire's Heart Story, your own family channel. May the Almighty wrap every woman in a love so gentle it heals her pain, a peace so deep it softens every burden, and a strength so tender it carries her through every storm. May her heart be protected, her steps be guided, and her days be filled with blessings she never has to ask for. May she receive the same love she gives, the same care she pours out, and the same comfort she brings into every life she touches. You deserve heavens of respect, oceans of joy, and a lifetime of calm. My beautiful family, I see many of you watching, but not liking, not commenting. Tell me honestly, have you forgotten your brother, Mr. BH? Or do you feel I should stop writing these emotional messages? Your one comment gives me strength. If your heart is true, like the video, if your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. BH." Let's start with love. The knock at 11 p.m. wasn't urgent. It was apologetic, which made everything worse. Ariana Miles, the financial analyst, paused her deep dive into next quarter's projections, the clinical focus of her work instantly dissolving into a raw knot of dread. This was the moment when life became a crisis, delivered by the trembling hand of her overly dramatic neighbor, Camilla Hart. Ariana crossed the threshold of Camilla Hart's lavish, minimalist home. The air inside wasn't thick with the heavy scent of illicit perfume or cheap wine. It was unnaturally sterile, scented with an expensive, unplaceable white musk. The quiet was louder than any screaming match could have been. Camilla, still trembling but suddenly composed, kept her hand clasped dramatically over her mouth. Her tears, though real, seemed carefully choreographed, streaking mascara down cheeks that were usually flawless for her lifestyle blog. This wasn't the look of a terrified mistress. It was the performance of a woman acting out a scene she'd rehearsed. As a financial analyst who spent her days dissecting numbers for signs of fraudulent behavior, Ariana knew how to spot an irregularity, and Camilla was a monumental one. "He's in the guest room," Camilla whispered, her voice cracking just enough. I told him to wait." Ariana didn't respond. Her rage, initially a hot, blinding flash, was receding, replaced by a cold, clinical suspicion. The absence of the expected drama was itself a clue. She followed Camilla down a long, dark corridor toward the back of the house. The door to the guest room was slightly ajar. Camilla halted, pointing a manicured finger toward the gap, then backed away, clutching her chest. "I can't. You need to." Ariana pushed the door open herself. The scene was the antithesis of the betrayal she had been bracing for. Ethan Miles, her billionaire husband, was not entangled in sheets or half-dressed. He was sitting stiffly on the edge of the queen-size bed, fully clothed in the bespoke charcoal suit he'd worn to the office that morning. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and his face was utterly pale but not with guilt or spent passion. He looked genuinely terrified. The only sign of disorder was a low, mahogany desk beside him. On it lay an unzipped laptop bag and a small, military-grade encrypted flash drive, still blinking a faint, rhythmic green light. Ethan's eyes weren't fixed on her, they were fixed on the drive. "Ariana," he managed, his voice thin, devoid of its usual charismatic boom. "It's not what you think." Her analytical mind, trained to cut through noise and emotion, immediately rejected the sexual betrayal narrative. "No," she said, her voice flat, "it's not. If you were having an affair, you'd be hiding yourself. You're hiding that." She gestured toward the blinking drive. Ethan scrambled to stand, knocking over a glass of water. "It's a sensitive deal, Ari, a massive one. We had a hostile takeover attempt planned, and the documents are highly confidential. I couldn't risk the home server being accessed. Camilla offered the use of her secure line. She was just helping a neighbor. The excuse was flimsy. A billionaire with a global tech firm could secure private data anywhere. And Camilla's theatrics, just outside the door, now solidified Ariana's new theory. The affair was the smoke. The drive was the fire. Camilla had not confessed to betrayal. She had executed a diversion. Ariana walked past him, her gaze never leaving the flash drive. She plucked it from the desk. It felt heavy in her hand, far more substantial than any ring or key. This wasn't infidelity. This was financial treason. "Give it back," Ethan pleaded, reaching for her, the first flicker of genuine desperation in his eyes. Ariana tucked the drive deep into the pocket of her silk robe. She looked him over, the anxious tick in his jaw, the sweat gathering at his temples. He wasn't the charming, distant mogul anymore. He was a cornered animal. "I'm a financial analyst, Ethan. I see what you don't want me to see. Whatever this is, it's bigger than a hostile takeover. This is a liability." She turned to leave the room. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly hard. "Ariana, please. I am begging you. Do not look at those files. Do not say a word to anyone. If you do, you don't just ruin me. You ruin us. You ruin everything. Keep silent, or everything collapses." Ariana didn't sleep. She didn't cry. Crying was an irrational, emotional reaction to a problem that required a rational solution. The crumpled charcoal suit Ethan wore, the desperation in his voice, the theatrical performance by Camilla, these were all data points that had to be analyzed, not wept over. At 7 a.m., she called her office and fabricated a severe 24-hour flu. She, a woman known for perfect attendance and clinical stability, was skipping a crucial market analysis meeting. The absurdity was another point for the file. She spent the next 3 hours in her home office, trying to bypass the encryption on the flash drive. The security protocol was sophisticated, demanding a high-level private key. This was not the security for a routine hostile takeover document. This was the vault for a catastrophic liability. At 10 a.m., Ariana called her only confidant, Nina Brooks. Nina arrived within the hour, bringing coffee, a set of advanced decryption tools, and a healthy dose of protective outrage. "Tell me you burned his suits and changed the locks already," Nina muttered, setting up her gear on Ariana's pristine glass desk. "There was no mistress, Nina. Just a nervous billionaire hiding a flash drive. The betrayal isn't his libido, it's his ledger." Ariana relayed the previous night's scene with the dispassionate clarity of a prosecutor reading a police report. Nina, a cybersecurity expert, listened silently, her concentration already fixed on the blinking device. A billionaire resorting to the neighbor's house for security? That's not paranoia, that's evidence tampering. By noon, the encryption yielded. The files were not labeled top secret deal. They were labeled with alphanumeric codes that led into a vast, complex architecture of shell corporations and offshore holding accounts, all connected back to Ethan's global logistics firm. Ariana leaned over the screen, the smell of fresh coffee forgotten. Her expertise was in spotting anomalies, and the files were screaming. "Look at this," she instructed, tapping the monitor, her finger tracing a convoluted transaction pathway. "The volume is too high, the routing is too complex, and the recipients are all companies incorporated in 3 different tax havens within the last 6 months. They don't exist as physical entities." Nina whistled softly. Textbook money laundering. And massive. The scale of this operation. This isn't pocket change, Ari. We're talking about diverting hundreds of millions. Ariana's analysis sharpened. She cross-referenced the transaction dates with Ethan's public schedule and the company's quarterly reports. The funds are being funneled out right before a scheduled federal audit of his company's overseas operations. He was liquidating his assets, making the company look solvent but hollow, preparing for a fire sale, or worse. The realization hit her with the force of a cold draft. Ethan hadn't asked her to keep quiet to save their marriage. He'd asked her to keep quiet to prevent a federal indictment that would collapse his entire empire and potentially drag her, his wife and co-signatory on several accounts, down with him. His plea of "you ruin us" wasn't romantic. It was a confession of shared liability. "Camilla," Ariana stated, her eyes narrowed. The dramatic confession, the tears, the 11 p.m. timing, it was all designed to plant the idea of infidelity. A classic distraction. If I thought he was cheating, I'd be focused on divorce and emotional recovery, not on decoding his financial files. She was a decoy, Nina agreed. Part of the operational security of the fraud itself. Ariana pushed back from the desk. The lingering mystery of who else was involved in Camilla's ploy tightening around her. But that could wait. Her focus had to be on the most immediate, critical threat: the money. She checked the files one last time. There was one final, massive wire transfer scheduled for the end of the day tomorrow, an exit maneuver that would complete the collapse. Ariana finally looked at her reflection in the dark screen. The cold, calculating gaze of the analyst had completely eclipsed the bewildered look of the betrayed wife. "Ethan told me to keep silent," she stated, her voice regaining its professional steel. "I cannot do that. I have a fiduciary duty to myself and to prevent a total financial meltdown." She picked up her phone, the blinking flash drive still heavy in her robe pocket. Cold justice was the only path forward. "We need to contact a lawyer, but not ours. We need to contact a financial crimes expert and the board of directors. We have 24 hours to lock down his assets before he empties the vault." 22 hours after the 11 p.m. confession, Ariana Miles sat at the head of the conference table in the penthouse boardroom of Miles Global Logistics, flanked by a team of federal financial crimes attorneys. The room was all polished chrome and tempered glass, reflecting the cold, clear light of morning. Ariana wore an impeccably tailored navy suit, her face devoid of makeup, her demeanor entirely professional. She was no longer a wife. She was a major shareholder exercising her power. The emergency board meeting had been called under vague pretenses of unforeseen executive misconduct, giving Ethan little time to mount a proper defense. He arrived late, his usual slick arrogance slightly frayed, replaced by nervous bravado. He hadn't expected this venue for their confrontation. He'd expected the divorce lawyer's office, a messy, personal brawl. Instead, he walked into a corporate execution. "I appreciate everyone making time for this unusual meeting," Ariana began, her voice calm and controlled, cutting through the murmurs of the board members. "However, the urgency is paramount. As a major shareholder, I am presenting findings that affect the solvency and legal standing of this company." Ethan scoffed, a familiar sound of dismissal. "Ariana, this is highly inappropriate. Any private matter between us is not for public consumption." Ariana met his gaze, her eyes like chips of ice. "This is not a private matter, Ethan. This is a matter of fiduciary duty." She nodded to one of the attorneys, who activated a large screen displaying the first slide. It was a dizzying diagram of the shell corporations and offshore entities decoded from the flash drive. "Over the past 6 months," Ariana continued, adopting the clinical tone of a surgeon dictating a procedure, "Mr. Miles has systematically funneled funds estimated at over $400 million through a series of non-existent entities. This activity, classified as aggravated money laundering, was designed to hollow out Miles Global Logistics ahead of the impending federal audit." As she spoke, she used her expertise to translate the complex financial jargon into brutal, understandable truths for the board. She detailed the false invoicing, the fabricated contracts, and the sophisticated tax evasion, all tied directly back to authorization keys held only by Ethan. The methodical, data-driven presentation left no room for doubt or spin. Ethan started to sweat. He tried to interrupt, his voice rising. "This is slander. She's retaliating. This is a baseless accusation driven by personal issues." "The evidence is not baseless," Ariana countered sharply, presenting the final, damning piece of data, the schedule for the final, catastrophic wire transfer planned for 5 p.m. the following day. This final maneuver would have left the company bankrupt, unable to meet employee payroll or cover critical insurance liabilities, while Mr. Miles enjoyed a newly liquid offshore fortune. She paused, letting the silence hang heavy. His motive was not a hostile takeover, it was a hostile exit. And his confession to our neighbor was simply an operational distraction to buy him 24 hours to complete the fraud. The board members looked from the diagram to Ethan, their faces a mixture of shock and betrayal. They were corporate allies, not friends. Their only loyalty was to the bottom line. Given the evidence of calculated fraud and a clear intent to abandon fiduciary responsibility, Ariana announced, "I call for an immediate vote to remove Ethan Miles as CEO and place the company under emergency administration to prevent the imminent financial collapse and cooperate fully with federal authorities." The vote was a swift, unanimous motion of hands raised against the man who had been their leader. In moments, Ethan's empire was reduced to a public humiliation. "No," Ethan whispered, the word hollow. He looked at Ariana, the terror returning, but this time mixed with genuine, searing hatred. "You did this. You destroy everything." Ariana felt a fleeting pang, but it was quickly suppressed by the cold satisfaction of justice delivered. "You destroyed it, Ethan. I'm simply an analyst, reporting the irregularity." As security officers moved in to escort the deposed CEO, Ethan's body gave out. He didn't faint dramatically. He slumped, his legs buckling, his knees hitting the polished floor with a dull thud. The humiliation was absolute. He was detained briefly by the attorneys present and later taken away by private security to process his initial legal matters. Ariana didn't flinch as she watched her husband of 6 years dragged away, his face etched with failure. She was already back to work, turning to her new legal team. "The immediate priority is freezing the Cayman accounts," she instructed, picking up the fallen thread of the meeting. "We move swiftly to secure the assets and stabilize the stock. The emotional part is over. Now we rebuild." Act 2 had begun. With Ethan removed and the legal freeze successfully implemented, the financial crisis was contained. But the mystery of the 11 p.m. confession still grated on Ariana. She needed to close the loop on the decoy Camilla Hart. If the affair was a calculated lie, someone had calculated it, and that meant another enemy was lurking in the shadows of Ethan's ruined life. Ariana delegated the deep investigation to Nina, leveraging her cybersecurity skills to uncover the digital trail left by the meddling neighbor. Camilla wasn't just rambling, Ari, Nina reported 2 days later, projecting a screen full of social media analytics onto the wall of Ariana's office. Her blog posts over the last month weren't organic. They were strategically placed breadcrumbs. Nina scrolled through Camilla's popular lifestyle blog, Heart to Home. Interspersed between tutorials on tablescaping and reviews of organic face masks were oblique, non-sequitur posts. One talked about the anxiety of keeping a major secret for someone you care about the night before the scheduled board meeting. Another featured a photo of her guest room, captioned, "Sometimes, the biggest secrets are kept right under your nose." She wasn't confessing, Ariana realized, tapping the screen where a cryptic post mentioned a delivery man who brought more than just packages. She was creating a verifiable backstory. "If I had simply run to the divorce attorney, this digital trail would have solidified the narrative of a neighbor's affair, confusing any future investigation into the fraud." "Exactly," Nina confirmed. She set the stage for the cover story. The next break came from an unexpected source. Jordan Hart, Camilla's partner. He had been absent during the whole fiasco, away on a long engineering project, aligning perfectly with Camilla's need for an empty house. He returned, found his wife hysterical and his neighbors in crisis, and promptly called Ariana. They met in a neutral cafe far from the neighborhood. Jordan, a quiet man who kept to himself, looked physically ill. "I need to tell you what happened," Jordan began, his voice low and strained. Camilla wasn't in love with Ethan. She hated him, actually, but someone forced her hand. He revealed that a powerful business rival of Ethan's, a man named Alec Vance, who Ethan had aggressively beaten out for a major contract years ago, had approached Camilla. Vance knew about her significant, but hidden, online gambling debts. Vance didn't want Ethan hurt personally. He wanted to destroy the company, leverage the chaos, and seize the contracts, Jordan explained. Vance gave Camilla 2 choices. Orchestrate the affair diversion to keep you busy while Ethan finalized the asset transfer, or Vance would expose her debts and ruin her family. The initial affair confession at 11 p.m. was part of the timeline Vance had dictated. Camilla was terrified of Vance, not lustful for Ethan. Ariana absorbed the new information, the pieces of the puzzle snapping violently into place. The betrayal wasn't just Ethan's financial fraud. It was a multi-layered, calculated campaign orchestrated by a vengeful third party who used the neighbor as a pawn. A bizarre, complicated knot of empathy twisted in Ariana's gut. Camilla was terrified, not treacherous. A coerced actress in a grand, ugly scheme. She had risked her marriage to save her reputation, only for Ariana to pivot and expose the deeper crime anyway. But the flash of empathy was immediately eclipsed by a cold surge of profound anger at Ethan's hidden life. Alec Vance, Ariana murmured. An enemy powerful enough to operate this network, with enough spite to target not just his business, but his private life. Ethan's arrogance and aggressive business practices weren't just creating rivals. They were creating enemies who were waiting for the right moment to strike. She realized the problem wasn't just the money laundering. The problem was the toxicity of the environment. Ethan had created a world of paranoia, enemies, and ethical rot that was bound to collapse. His actions had invited this level of ruthless retaliation. "We need to tell the lawyers everything about Vance," Ariana told Jordan, standing up. "You and Camilla are protected if you cooperate." Walking away from the cafe, Ariana felt utterly alone, yet strangely unburdened. Her marriage hadn't been a victim of fleeting passion. It had been a casualty of high-stakes corporate warfare and her husband's own ethical bankruptcy. The financial analyst in her understood the calculation. The wife in her understood she had been betrayed long before the 11 p.m. knock, betrayed by the secrets, the stress, and the very foundation of Ethan's dubious fortune. "The emotional part is over," she told the board. She was wrong. She was now forced to confront the long, ugly consequences of her husband's hidden life. 6 months passed, marked not by seasons or holidays, but by the relentless progression of legal deadlines and market corrections. For Ariana, this period was one of clinical, focused recovery. She spent her days working with the interim management team to stabilize Miles' global logistics, effectively saving it from federal charges and vulture capitalists, including the vengeful Alec Vance. Her professional life had never been more purposeful. She had successfully cut out the rot and the patient. The company was beginning to breathe again. Her personal life, however, was a vacuum. The sprawling house felt too large, the silence too loud. Ethan was gone. He had negotiated a temporary plea agreement that included full cooperation, disgorgement of assets, and a likely short prison sentence, allowing him to be released on a technicality until the final sentencing hearing. With his fortune seized, his reputation destroyed, and his network evaporated, the billionaire simply vanished from the elite circles. Ariana didn't search for him. She didn't have to. Nina, ever the loyal watchdog, had a network that spanned every echelon of society, even its shadows. "I found him," Nina said one afternoon, dropping a printed satellite photo onto Ariana's desk. Ariana picked up the photo. It showed a modest, industrial-looking building in a forgotten, low-income district far from their pristine neighborhood, a place Ethan Miles would never have set foot in 6 months ago. The grainy image was focused on the entrance, where a man was bending over, sweeping cigarette butts and trash from the doorstep. The man was Ethan. He wore old jeans, a faded t-shirt, and heavy work boots. His posture was different, less rigid, less entitled. He looked older, his face leaner and lined, devoid of the soft arrogance privilege had afforded him. "He's volunteering at a place called the Bite Bench," Nina explained, her voice carefully neutral. "It's a non-profit tech center. They teach coding, basic repair, and digital literacy to kids and adults who can't afford vocational training." Ariana studied the photo, her professional suspicion warring with a reluctant fascination. This wasn't a PR stunt. There was no media presence, no white-collar networking. He was simply sweeping. Over the next few weeks, Ariana arranged for Nina to provide updates, not to satisfy residual affection, but to complete the analytical file on Ethan Miles' post-crisis behavior. The reports were consistent. Ethan wasn't just fundraising or sitting on a board. He was physically there, 6 days a week, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. He was teaching basic Python to a class of skeptical high schoolers. He was repairing outdated computer hardware donated by his former rivals. He was even, one day, photographed patiently helping a frustrated elderly man understand how to use an email attachment. He looks different, Ariana admitted to Nina after reviewing a batch of candid photos. He is, Nina confirmed. He's dealing with the legal fallout, doing community service ahead of sentencing, and he's living in a small, rented apartment above a noisy pizza place. He's broke, Ari. And he's doing hard, unglamorous work. Not because he has to, but because the alternative is sitting in his apartment drowning in self-pity. Ariana recognized the hard work of genuine change. It was the difference between a patient taking a single pill versus committing to months of grueling, physical therapy to recover lost mobility. The initial pain was easy to manage. The relentless, dull effort of rebuilding character was the real test. Ethan was stripped bare of his identity as a billionaire tech mogul. He was just a man with coding skills and a massive debt to society. Her own emotions were complex. She felt a cold detachment from the ghost of the man who had betrayed her trust, but a growing, reluctant respect for the man who was showing up, day after day, in that dusty community center. He was proving that the core competency of his mind, the technical brilliance that built his empire, could be harnessed for good, not just for greed. One chilly Tuesday, Ariana drove across town. She didn't enter the bite bench. She parked her sedan discreetly down the street and watched through the center's large window. Ethan was standing at a whiteboard, sketching a complex data structure. The students were captivated. He didn't look like the panicked man hiding a flash drive, or the arrogant CEO who couldn't be bothered to notice his wife's success. He looked like an earnest, passionate teacher. As she drove away, Ariana realized that Ethan's downfall had achieved what her marriage never could. It had forced him to see himself, stripped of his privilege, and to use his talent to serve instead of conquer. The observation was complete. She had the data. Now, she had to figure out what to do with it, knowing that the man she had destroyed was now actively, genuinely rebuilding himself. His transformation was a variable she hadn't accounted for in her revenge calculations. The 6 months since Ethan's downfall had solidified a strange peace for Ariana. She had built a sturdy, logical wall around herself, focused on the data of her recovery. But the human heart, unlike a spreadsheet, resists final accounting. Her observation of Ethan's consistent, unprivileged work at the bite bench had introduced a disruptive variable: genuine transformation. The first, subtle test arrived indirectly, via Nina. Bite bench is doing well, Nina mentioned during their weekly check-in, reviewing new security protocols for the revitalized company. But they just lost a key grant. They need $15,000 for their Summer Code for Kids program, a small but critical gap. Ariana's first impulse was purely analytical. Write the check. It's a rounding error for her and a legitimate cause. But her internal sentinel, the part of her still protecting the fortress walls, recoiled. Giving him money was blurring the lines, rewarding him before the process was complete. Has Ethan asked anyone for the funds? Ariana asked, keeping her tone professionally detached. No, Nina replied, a slight note of respect in her voice. He's been working the problem. He sold his last watch, the limited edition Patek Philippe he used to wear like a second skin. It covered most of the gap, but they're still short a few thousand. Ariana felt a sharp, unexpected jolt. That watch had represented everything she despised about the old Ethan: the entitlement, the flash, the quiet gloating of success. He hadn't asked her, hadn't exploited their past connection, and hadn't used his humiliation as a bargaining chip. He had sacrificed the last, meaningless remnant of his old self to secure a small, crucial program for others. He chose humility over leverage. Test 1. Passed. He respected the boundary of their separation. The second test was one Ariana initiated, born out of professional necessity and a calculated desire to gauge the permanence of his new ethical structure. Her firm, currently consulting on a major logistics bid, ran into an ethical quagmire. A crucial competitor dossier, full of proprietary information, had been anonymously dumped on their encrypted server. It was a tempting shortcut that could guarantee the contract, but using it would constitute corporate espionage. an echo of the ethical decay that ruined Ethan. The board was divided, wanting the win but fearing the legal exposure. Ariana realized the decision required absolute ethical fortitude, a quality the old Ethan lacked, but the new Ethan seemed to possess. She decided to approach him. It was a cold, calculated experiment, risking a fragile piece for crucial data. She met him not at the bite bench, but at a quiet, generic coffee shop halfway between their two worlds. Ethan arrived on time, wearing his usual simple attire, and looked surprised, but not defensive. "Ariana," he greeted, his voice respectful. He didn't ask how she was. He simply said, "Thank you for meeting me." She bypassed small talk entirely. "I have a professional situation. No names, no dates. Just a hypothetical ethical challenge." She laid out the dilemma, the sudden, anonymous arrival of illicitly obtained proprietary data. She watched him closely, a clinical observer waiting for a behavioral flag. The old Ethan would have lit up, seeing an opportunity. He would have rationalized using the data as aggressive market intelligence and chastised her for her naive conscience. The new Ethan listened carefully, his eyes focused on the coffee cup. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he took a slow breath. "The flaw isn't in having the information, Ariana. The flaw is in the dependency it creates. Once you rely on compromised data for a win, you've fundamentally poisoned your decision-making process. You're no longer operating with integrity. You're operating from fear of not having the shortcut next time." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly, without deflection or drama. "You win the contract by proving your own competence is superior, not by exploiting a rival's vulnerability. If you use it, you're buying a win at the cost of your firm's ethical foundation. And that foundation, as I learned, is the only thing that lasts." The advice was clear, unselfish, and profound. It was the wisdom of a man who had already paid the ultimate price for prioritizing a shortcut over a foundation. Ariana felt a release of tension she hadn't known she was holding. He hadn't just passed the test. He had articulated the very principle of ethical fortitude that she needed to save her own firm's future. He demonstrated a humility and ethical awareness that surpassed her own analysis. She quietly thanked him, explaining that his advice was precisely what she needed, and left. She authorized the legal team to discard the dossier and focus the firm on winning the bid on merit. Later that week, she anonymously wired the final necessary funds to the bite bench. It wasn't forgiveness. It was an investment in a verified behavioral change. Ethan Miles was transforming, not just surviving. The cold walls of her fortress were starting to feel less like protection and more like isolation. The complexity of his redemption was forcing Ariana to confront her own internal boundaries. The successful navigation of the second test, the ethical dilemma, did not bring Ariana peace. It brought chaos. The professional respect she now felt for the transformed Ethan was a seismic shift threatening the carefully constructed walls of her emotional defense. The old Ethan had been easy to categorize, easy to destroy, and easy to detach from. The new Ethan, humble, ethical, and working for the genuine good of others, was an inconvenient truth. Her internal conflict peaked on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after their quiet meeting. She found herself staring at the two-dimensional model of his former shell corporations, no longer seeing financial crime, but a distorted map of a desperate man's mind. She finally called Nina, not for technical support, but for the clarity of a confidant, opting for a dimly lit, anonymous wine bar, far from their usual spots. "I feel crazy," Ariana admitted, nursing a glass of Merlot. "The man who betrayed me doesn't exist anymore. The man I see now, he's the man I always wanted him to be." Nina, always the pragmatist, leaned forward. "So, you won. You ran a perfect strategy, forced his ego to break. And now he's compliant, ethical, and actively repairing the damage. What's the problem?" "The problem is that I'm terrified of him now." "Not disgusted," Ariana confessed, the raw vulnerability startling even herself. Disgust was easy. It was a firm boundary. But now, I see the potential for risk again. The risk of hope, the risk of vulnerability. She realized her deep-seated fear wasn't about him hurting her again. It was about her willingness to feel deeply again. She had perfected the art of the clinical, data-driven life. Allowing Ethan back in, even hypothetically, meant accepting a massive emotional variable into her controlled equation. "I'm scared of having to forgive him," Ariana whispered, her hand shaking slightly. "If I forgive him, I have to let down the armor I spent a year building. I'm afraid that if I open that door, I'll have to accept that I was fundamentally wrong about what makes a man worthy. And I'm afraid that if I risk loving him again, the trauma of the betrayal, the ghost in the closet, will always be there, waiting to haunt me." Nina gently countered. "It sounds like you're afraid to let go of the pain because the pain feels like protection. But you're punishing the man he was by refusing to acknowledge the man he is." Ariana nodded slowly. Her flaw wasn't trusting Ethan initially. It was her desire to remain perpetually unexposed after the fact. Her greatest fear wasn't Ethan's infidelity or fraud. It was the prospect of her own renewed, deep emotional investment. She knew she couldn't rely on logic or Nina's wisdom to solve this. She was an analyst. She needed one final, undeniable piece of emotional data before she could make a strategic decision about her future. "I need to know if the man I see at the bite bench is authentic down to the core," Ariana stated, straightening her spine, the financial analyst reasserting control over the weary woman. "I need one last, purely emotional test. One that probes not his ethical walls, but his psychological ones." The next morning, Ariana drove to the community center. She waited until the last of the students had left. She approached Ethan as he was wiping down the whiteboards, a bucket of soapy water beside him. "I want to know why you did it," Ariana said, skipping all preamble. Ethan paused, the wet cloth hanging limply in his hand. He didn't look defensive or try to deflect with excuses about Alec Vance or corporate pressure. "I didn't do it for the money, Ari," he confessed, his voice thick with years of unsaid self-loathing. "I did it because I was afraid of you. I was drowning in the insecurity of knowing you were smarter, cleaner, and more competent than me. I built that fraud to prove that I was still the one with the real power, the power to break the rules and get away with it. When you came to Camilla's house, I was terrified you'd discover my weakness, not my cheating. I was a fraud who was running a bigger fraud to cover his self-hatred." He dropped the cloth into the bucket. "It took losing everything to see that. You saved me, Ariana, by destroying me." His raw, painful honesty, his confession of shame and insecurity, not greed, was the emotional data she needed. It shattered the last of her clinical defenses. He was a ghost, yes, but a ghost of his former self, and the man standing before her was accountable, vulnerable, and deeply human. Ariana didn't offer a path forward. "I have the information I needed," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll contact you when I've processed it." She walked out, leaving him standing alone. The final decision was hers, and it wouldn't be based on profit or loss, but on a terrifying leap of empowered faith. The final test would be deciding whether she was brave enough to risk her heart on a variable that was proving to be authentic. Ariana selected the venue for the reckoning with surgical precision, the abandoned lot adjacent to the bite bench. It was a place of potential currently gravel and overgrown weeds, but slated for the center's future expansion, a perfect metaphor for their relationship. She called Ethan and requested the meeting. He agreed instantly, his voice carrying the calm humility that had become his new standard. Ariana arrived first, waiting beside her car. She was dressed not in a sharp business suit, but in a simple, high-necked cashmere sweater and dark trousers clothes that conveyed focus, not armor. When Ethan walked toward her, he looked hesitant, less like a former CEO and more like a nervous job candidate. "Ethan," she greeted, her tone formal. "Thank you for coming. This meeting is not about the fraud." "I understand," he replied, standing a respectful distance away. "It's about what caused it." "Precisely. I've handled the financial irregularity. The company is stable, and the legal process is underway. That chapter is closed." She took a breath, the cold wind whipping across the empty lot. "This chapter is about the emotional distance and weakness that made the fraud possible in the first place." Ariana launched into her emotional audit, delivering the final confrontation not as an explosion of rage, but as a meticulously prepared analysis of his character deficit. "The initial betrayal wasn't the fraud, Ethan. It was your refusal to be vulnerable with your wife. We were partners in life. But you shut me out of your fear. You were terrified of my success, so you built a secret world where you could be the big bosses without competition. You didn't trust my love to handle your insecurity. That emotional distance was the cancer. She paced slowly. When you told me I would ruin us if I looked at the drive, you weren't protecting me from the government. You were protecting your delusion of competence. You sacrificed our trust, our assets, and our future to feed a hungry, brittle ego. Ethan listened, his eyes downcast, accepting every word. He didn't offer an excuse. You're right. Every success I had felt hollow because I knew I was hiding my biggest failure, my insecurity. I should have told you I felt inadequate when you started out earning me. Instead, I outsourced my worth to tax havens and shell companies. His lack of defense was powerful. He wasn't arguing the facts of the audit. He was agreeing with the analysis. Ariana walked over to her car and pulled out a manila envelope, heavier than any legal document she had given him before. I observed your transformation for 6 months. I ran 2 tests, one on humility, one on ethics. You passed. I believe your change is genuine, Ethan, but I am not offering forgiveness. Forgiveness is cheap. I am offering an opportunity for you to earn a future with me. She handed him the envelope. Inside was a single, heavily stipulated document, the Relationship Transparency Contract. This is not a marriage license. It is a set of non-negotiable terms for conditional coexistence, Ariana stated, her voice ironclad. You are getting this chance not because of your potential, but because of my strength to believe in change, and my strength to walk away if you fail. Ethan opened the document, his eyes scanning the clauses. Absolute transparency, full and immediate visibility into all current and future financial accounts, professional communications, and legal proceedings. No private passwords, no off-the-books transactions. Mandatory therapeutic commitment. Weekly, independent therapy for both him and joint sessions when stipulated by the counselor. His progress reports were to be shared with her legal confidant, Nina, monthly for verification of ongoing psychological work. Redefined roles. His focus is strictly on community service and rebuilding his ethical foundation through the Bite Bench. No re-entry into high-stakes corporate finance without my express written consent, which requires years of demonstrated consistency. Accountability first. Any attempt to mislead, manipulate, or hide information, no matter how small, results in the immediate and permanent termination of the contract and immediate finalization of divorce proceedings, with 0 appeal. Physical boundary. We start slow. We are not married. We are not living together. We are 2 individuals attempting to build a healthy partnership, one choice at a time. Earned trust precedes emotional intimacy. Ethan looked up from the page, his eyes wet. He didn't see restrictions. He saw structure, accountability, and a profound second chance. It's harsh, he said, his voice husky. It's clinical. It's a structure to protect me from the ghost of who you were, and a blueprint to hold the man you are becoming accountable, Ariana confirmed. Do you accept the terms? He nodded, tears finally escaping. Yes. Every single one. Thank you, Ariana. I will spend the rest of my life earning the right to be in the same room as you. Don't thank me yet, she instructed, reclaiming her cold analyst tone. Thank me in a year when you've proven this transformation is permanent. Until then, you work, you build, you earn. She gave him a simple, practical key not to their home, but to a small, newly renovated storage closet at the Bite Bench that would serve as his new, temporary office. Power reclaimed. The reckoning was complete. Ariana had defined her future on her terms, giving him the path to redemption, but retaining full control over her destiny. 1 year had passed since Ariana presented the Relationship Transparency Contract. The barren lot beside the Bite Bench was now a sleek, low-slung building, the first physical manifestation of their new, shared purpose. Ethos Labs, a non-profit tech incubator dedicated to ethical, community-driven innovation. Their rebuilding was not a swift Hollywood reconciliation. It was a slow, deliberate exercise in consistent action. Ethan maintained his distance, renting a small place nearby, working tirelessly under the contract's constraints. His legal fate was finally settled, a light sentence of house arrest and mandatory community service, a testament to his immediate cooperation, restitution efforts, and demonstrated transformation. Ariana observed. She received his monthly progress reports from his therapist, reviewed his audited financials for Ethos Labs, and watched him lead community workshops. He never pushed for intimacy, focusing instead on earning professional respect and structural trust. The grand opening of Ethos Labs was a subdued but profound success. Ariana, dressed in a sharp white suit, watched as Ethan, humble in a simple blazer, accepted quiet congratulations from local officials and community leaders. He was no longer the flamboyant mogul, he was a respected contributor. That evening, Ariana broke Clause 5 for the first time, not by inviting him home, but by inviting him to dinner at a small, candlelit restaurant far from their old neighborhood. It was their first date. 1 year later, the conversation flowed easily, covering market trends, the incubator's budget, and the complexities of ethical AI development, the language of their new, shared venture. After the main course, Ariana placed her wine glass down. "We need to talk about the contract," she said. Ethan immediately tensed, ready for a revision or termination. "Is there a breach? Have I failed the terms?" "No," Ariana assured him. "You've honored them meticulously. You've proven that the man in the guest room who was hiding shame, not lust, is gone. The emotional audit is complete." She smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips that reached her eyes. "I believe in the man sitting across from me. He's accountable, he's transparent, and he's honest about his weakness." "Thank you, Ariana," he whispered, genuinely moved. "But where does that leave the contract?" "It leaves us with a choice," she said. "We can finalize the divorce and walk away, both of us whole and victorious. Or we can move forward, not as husband and wife yet, but as partners attempting to build something new." "I choose forward," Ethan said instantly. "But the terms, the structure, I don't want those to go away. I need those boundaries, Ari. They keep me honest." Ariana nodded. "The core principles of the contract, absolute transparency, mandatory therapy, and accountability, those remain permanent stipulations of our relationship. That's our foundation now, but we can dissolve the physical boundary. I'd like you to move back into the house." Ethan looked stunned, hope warring with trepidation. "Are you sure? I don't want to rush anything." "I am sure," she affirmed, "because I am the one setting the pace, and because I now trust my own judgment, regardless of your actions." The conversation shifted to the elephant in the room, the night that started it all. "Do you ever think about the 11 p.m. confession?" Ethan asked quietly. "Every night, in a way," Ariana admitted. "But I don't see betrayal anymore. I see a turning point. The confession was a calculated lie by Camilla, orchestrated by Vance, but it became a brutal truth for us. It forced me to look at the financial rot you were creating, and it forced you to face the rot in your soul." She reached across the table, not to hold his hand, but to gently touch the sleeve of his jacket, a purely structural, non-romantic gesture. "We succeeded, Ethan, not because you were worthy of redemption, but because I was strong enough to demand accountability and wise enough to observe transformation," Ariana stated, reciting the central thesis of her year-long emotional journey. "I won. I protected my assets, saved your company, and leveraged your ruin into your rebirth." He smiled, a genuine, humble smile that acknowledged her power. "I know, and I wouldn't have it any other way. You are extraordinary, Ariana." As they left the restaurant and walked toward the car, the night air was crisp and clear. They were not reconciled. They were rebuilt. Their future was conditional hope, requiring daily choice and consistent effort. Ariana reflected on the journey. She had faced the ghost of her shattered past, conducted the most rigorous audit of her life, and emerged unbroken. She hadn't needed Ethan's redemption to be whole. She was already whole. She was powerful, victorious, and brave enough to believe that a new form of love, one based on earned trust and absolute transparency, was possible. And as they drove toward their home, together yet separate, ready to face the complexities of tomorrow, Ariana smiled. She had proven that the 11 p.m. confession was not the ending of her story, but the rebirth of her power.